Hi, and welcome to Postscript. I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and we're happy that you joined us today. Postscript is a regular, we try to do it monthly, program where we feature unusual and extraordinary and interesting people from around the world who have something to say about this amazing kind of transition that we're all making on this planet to the emergence of what appears to me, at least, to be a new world and a new human being. We do this every month because we have a speaker series here in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, called Berkeley Springs Transition Talks. And here, 100 miles from Washington, D.C., and from Baltimore, we bring these good folks out and have a delightful afternoon, and we bring them into the studio to talk more personally about some of the issues that they are interested in. Today our guest is Steve McDonald. Steve comes to us from Australia, which will be very obvious very soon. And he is an expert in many interesting things about the kind of the emerging leading edge of what is happening in terms of this evolution to a new world. He thinks about it theoretically and conceptually, as well as in very kind of practical terms. And so, Steve, it's nice to have you back.
Thank you, John. Great to be here.
For the second time. You've been here. This is your third time, isn't it? I think.
Second time speaking.
Yeah.
But I've visited more than that.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you here. We always have wonderful conversations when you come into the area, and we gather up a group of folks to talk about what in fact is going on. Today you're going to talk a little bit about tension and what's going on and how that kind of drives and informs the kind of process that's coming downstream.
Yeah, so it's pretty obvious to most people that some things seem to be going backwards at the moment. You know, the quality of leadership and.
You're not talking about our politics.
Oh no, I wouldn't be talking about that. But so it's a confusing time. You know, a lot of social systems are starting to become less efficient, and just generally things appear a bit ragged around the edges. You know, and that's confusing because we are actually moving through an evolutionary progression, but we seem to be headed backwards instead of forwards. And so I'm here to talk about why that is so.
Yeah. Well, it's a giant, huge thing that has no precedent, really. No one comes into the room with the experience about how to deal with one of these kinds of things.
Yeah, exactly. So the last time we went through a shift like this was some hundreds of years ago, around the scientific and industrial revolutions. And of course, you know, no one is around from back then. We've just got historical evidence to look at.
And it's spread over much longer time.
Yeah.
The impact, you know, doesn't come as quickly, and such. It doesn't have the metabolism of what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in terms of historical records, we only have records of the last paradigm shift, which was that scientific industrial revolution. And as you say, it happened over a much longer period. And prior to that, there was the shift to an agricultural kind of lifestyle where people started to move in and live in towns and cities. We don't have any good records of that, and we're not really even sure exactly when it began. So we don't have a lot to refer to, but what we do know is that the speed of change is directly related to the speed of communication. So as our communication has become faster, change has also become faster, and most people can feel that, you know, in their day-to-day experience.
The other thing about it that's interesting to me is that the folks back then didn't realize what was going on. They didn't have kind of a fix about the internal kind of mechanisms and where this was going, kind of where it was pointing.
Yeah.
And I think we're at a place that is really quite unique in that regard, in that not only do we have a sense that this is going to, and we're in the middle of this kind of transition, but we're also in a position to begin to paint pictures about the possibilities of where this might, and use our technologies to do that.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you know, our understanding of science in general and human nature also is far more advanced than it used to be. So we've actually got a reasonable idea of what's going on. And rather than just being participants, you know, carried along by the flow, we can actually kind of stand back and objectively look at what's going on and even maybe tweak the process.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
which is exciting. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I think that some of us have a role to play to facilitate this transition. I think it's kind of inevitable, it's going to happen, and the only question is it really ragged and rough and painful, I guess, or less so?
Yeah.
And that's the extraordinary kind of opportunity that we have. I mean, who else gets to play like that? That's kind of cool.
That's exactly right. It's a fascinating time, and because of the compression of time, or the apparent compression of time due to the speeding up of communications and also the change process speeding up, what's happening is that the paradigm shifts themselves are starting to overlap some more than they used to. So there's even more than one paradigm shift underway at the moment. We're seeing a move from what we have known as the modern era to what we might call the postmodern. But at the same time, in the background and in an earlier stage of progression is this quantum leap in human consciousness, which has shown up in some of the research over the last 100 years or so. And that is influencing the current paradigm shift, even though it's going to peak later. And it's bringing quantum leaps in thinking and technology. So that makes it even more interesting.
This whole business about paradigm shifts is all about the framework from which you make sense out of reality. And so when you get a paradigm shift, you're changing the essential nature of how you see and understand how this reality all works. What are the rules? What are and so on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you could even say that people who live in different paradigms are really living in different worlds.
Right,
They
exactly.
interpret the world very differently, and they're motivated to do different things. Yeah.
And you need to understand that in terms of how you think about and assess what's going on, because it's not like they're really screwed up or some other kind of thing. I mean, they see this world in a coherent kind of way, and they're doing what they think is the right thing to do within their mindset, within their framework, within their worldview.
Yeah.
And so it starts to take the judgment kind of out of the assessment process, and really to kind of analyze and how to kind of move things around.
Yeah, I like the way you described that. Actually, it allows a real compassion. When you understand that people are being who any person would be given their life conditions, and it's the complexity of life conditions that gives us the momentum to move through the paradigms. And so when people find themselves stable in a certain set of life conditions, then they may settle at one of these earlier paradigms, and I say earlier in terms of historical appearance. So for example, there are still lots and lots of folks who are living in what we would call an agricultural kind of world, where there are very clear rules on how to live, which are laid down by belief systems like religions and those sorts of things. And they look to those rule sets to guide the way they live. Thinking tends to be quite linear. And it's a fairly predictable kind of a world to be in. But then, in more complex places like large cities, you've got people living in, what we would call a modern paradigm, which is much more fast-paced, much less predictable. And now we're seeing that shift, towards this postmodern world, which is a very humanitarian, network-centric world. So for some folks who are living in places where life is generally pretty simple, and they look at what's going on in these other places where the complexity is higher, it must be very confusing.
Well, sure, but I mean, it's just common sense, because you leave the country to go to the city because it's a different place.
That's
and it
right.
works,
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
does it. It has a different metabolism, different objectives, different things, and so you choose to where you live almost in a sense because of this worldview that supports who you are at the time. And so there's this natural kind of differences across the spectrum.
That's right, yeah. And with the emergence of this postmodern paradigm, and we're really in the change process now between the modern and postmodern, it's really gathering pace. We'll have, and it depends which model you refer to, but of course I've studied mostly the research of Clair W, who mapped out about 8 different paradigms. But we're moving into a world where we've got around about 5 paradigms coexisting. And that's the most we've ever had on the planet, and that's why the complexity is increasing, and why things seem to be a bit chaotic at the moment because we've got 5 different worldviews coexisting in the same physical space trying to get on with each other.
Yeah, but technology and other things is just driving, accelerating into this new world that's exploding in front of us. And, you know, the folks from Santa Fe Institute, for instance, say that years ago they did a study and came up with the conclusion that social systems change at a rate something like 1 million times slower than technology changes. And so you get this tension between the two of them that kind of drives the system forward.
Yeah, absolutely. The older paradigms are extremely persistent, you know. I mean, the oldest one would be the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, and arguably there probably aren't many, if any, folks living that way.
There's a lot of hunters out here in West Virginia.
Yeah,
there aren't too many gatherers, but there's a lot of hunters.
But, you know, the next paradigm after hunter-gatherer was the traditional tribal lifestyle, and there are still quite a number of people living that way around the world. And the subsequent paradigms, like a sort of egocentric, warlike, and then the agricultural, absolutistic, and then the modern, you know, there's still a lot of people who are spread right across the spectrum there. And you can look at humanity's progression through the evolutionary process as like a kind of conga line of people.
Yeah.
You know, and there are some folks who are living in the most complex places who are way up the front of the line, a whole bunch of people in the middle, and some folks down the back who are living in very simple and fairly stable life conditions.
So what happens when that conga line starts getting stretched out and the guys up in front are running really fast?
That's right. Well, that creates tension, and it's kind of like pulling back the elastic band on a slingshot. You know, the more tension you create, the more potential there is for very rapid forward movement. And so that's exactly what we're seeing right now, is we're seeing that tension is being created with the modern technology surging forward very, very quickly, you know, and largely due to our interconnected electronic networks. And then still these quite relatively stable older paradigms coexisting in the same space, but being exposed to the new technology and trying to cope with that's arrival. You're getting that stretch happening. And so the modern to postmodern shift can be compared to the agricultural to scientific industrial shift in terms of its scope of change, but we've got this quantum leap, which is really not all that far away, you know, in terms of time, moving very, very quickly, and the quantum technology that's coming, you know, it's popping up is just amazing, and that is really stretching the old elastic band there.
This is this Einsteinian kind of notion that you can't solve a problem at the same level that it was generated, and so it's kind of like when you're driven into a corner, it forces you to go up to another level in order to solve the problem, because there's no way at the previous level you can do that. So how does that happen? How do people, I mean, what is the dynamics in the social systems and governments and other kind of things that force this up to the new level? And then where's the kind of the tension between the new level and the old level?
Yeah, great question. So as you very rightly said, each paradigm solves the problems that were created by the old paradigm, but then living according to the new paradigm just naturally creates new problems that are more complex than the previous problems. And so that gives forward momentum to evolution. And what we've seen with the modern paradigm is it's been a very individualistic paradigm, and so there's been a lot of specialization and isolation in society. And that has created a whole bunch of different problems, you know, one of which is we've seen the breakdown of the kind of nuclear family unit in many cases, and the breakdown of communities as well, because of this specialization and the pursuit of individual goals. And other social systems, you know, have produced problems like the depletion of resources, you know, unsustainable practices and those sorts of things. So these are the new modern problems that are now screaming out to be solved, and some people would even say, you know, that are threatening our well-being, you know, as a species. Yeah,
but what you're saying is you cannot fix the present system. That all of the attempts to work and manipulate and redo the present system are fraught with failure by design, because the problems that we all have are the derivatives of that system.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, a really simple analogy might be, we saw the transition to motor vehicles when the Industrial Revolution came along, And previously we were using horses
Right.
mainly for transport. And it doesn't matter what you do to a horse; it's never going to be a motor car. You can try, but it's just not going to make it a motor car. So that's the kind of what you're saying. That's a great example. Is you just can't convert a horse into a motor car. You really need to have something different.
Yeah, but the
arise,
guys who have the horses are not liking the people who've got the cars because they're threatening their well-being and
That's right. They're
and
noisy.
and their
they're
whole
polluted,
kind of notion
yeah.
of-
All that kind of stuff. Yeah. So now we're seeing new systems like blockchain, for example, which are cropping up and actually really threatening our
Well, now
existing
explain that a little
economic
bit.
systems.
What's blockchain?
So blockchain is a technology that came from the inventor of Bitcoin, who still remains a mystery. But it's essentially an encrypted distributed network which can be used for
This is all on the internet kind of stuff, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, people can Google this and find this information. But essentially, it was originally developed to be a currency. And so it operates on a computer program which is distributed. So it doesn't just run on one computer, but the program runs on a whole network of computers. And you have the same processes replicated on a large scale. And it's essentially a ledger, like an accounting process. So it's keeping track of transactions. And in the original case, it was currency transactions.
Mm-hmm.
And then encrypting those records and storing them in blocks, which are put together in a chain. And that's where the name blockchain comes from. And so that provides a number of advantages. It means that currency can move around very, very quickly compared to the current modern banking systems. And it also says that the records of transactions are encrypted, and because they're distributed widely, it's very difficult to tamper with them. So, someone might hack one version of the records, but the records are stored in perhaps, hundreds of thousands or millions of places.
So you can do things and nobody knows what you're doing?
To some extent.
More,
yeah.
more so than...
More so than before.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And there are no centralized, I mean, and this is a common kind of dynamic about what information technology has been doing, is it disintermediates, it takes the things out of the middle, it takes the centralized nodes out, and so it's distributed across lots of different people so that you can't kind of control it at a node like you could before.
Yeah, exactly. So it takes out the middleman. And it's important to point out that this new technology has arisen directly as a result of the problems of our current economic system. So,
Right.
The very smart people who've developed this technology have looked at the way that our economy has periodic crashes, and they looked at the last global financial crash, and they said, well, maybe there's a better way. And so they put their minds to developing some different system which actually cuts out many of the weaknesses of our previous systems. And one of those weaknesses, of course, is human nature. And the human tendency in the modern era, at least, to want to try and exploit whatever can be exploited, and to cut corners and to
Right.
to bend the rules to suit personal agendas. And so they developed this system which really, in a sense, cuts out a lot of that human input because it's automated and it's encrypted, so it's hard to fiddle with. And so you're not going to get somebody in the middle of a transaction tweaking the figures or taking money off the side and that kind of thing, whereas that is happening to some extent in the old system, where you had banks and other financial institutions which would be in the middle of transactions. They would take a cut. They could slow the transactions down, like even when the old systems became computerized, they still wouldn't process transactions on the weekend, when they could, if they wanted to. But, so in the new system, you can complete a transfer of funds around the world in, say, 30 minutes, whereas in the banking system, you're waiting sort of 1 to 2 days, for interbank transfers and those sorts of things. So it's much faster, it's much less open to human influence, particularly in bad ways, more efficient.
It's harder to hack, it's harder to control.
Yeah, it is. So you could argue that a large part of our current global economy is controlled by the central banking system. Well, this takes the central banking system out of the picture.
It potentially takes all of the banks out of the middle, right?
Potentially, yes.
I mean, there are some of the guys who are doing the designing some of these systems who explicitly want to take the banks.
Well,
out, right?
and it was quite explicit too. You know, they've been quite clear that these systems were developed to change what's going on at the moment.
So it goes back to the simple kind of bartering kind of relationship, where interpersonal relationship, where you meet somebody on the street and you say, "I'll sell you this for this and this," and you don't have any kind of the government or the infrastructure or the financial infrastructure in the middle of it, but it's far more sophisticated, obviously.
Yeah, that's right. And you can look at each paradigm historically and see that the new systems that emerge as a result of the problems are always more sophisticated, and they always undercut the previous systems. You know, it's like Buckminster Fuller said, you need to develop a new system that makes the old system obsolete, and that's always what happens during paradigm shifts. Yeah.
Well, this is really kind of fascinating, and in our second segment, maybe we can talk a little bit more about this. But the blockchain technology is kind of representative of a number of things that are happening across a whole spectrum in biotechnology and life extension and genetics and even in terms of energy and so on. They're just these extraordinary kind of breakthroughs that are happening. It seems to be across the whole spectrum of the way we live that are driving us toward a brand new kind of world, and it's accelerating. It's happening faster.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what's interesting is that there's a parallel process in play, and so as this new technology and the new ways of thinking are rising, you've got the old systems which are slowly deteriorating and becoming less capable. And so on one hand, you can look at all the things that are failing and see the world looks like it's falling apart, which in a sense it is, the old world.
But it needs to fall apart.
But it needs to fall apart, exactly. And
progression is about this process.
That's right, and at the same time.
So it's a good message. It's good news.
It is good news.
In a sense.
It is good news, yeah. You know, we ought to look at the deconstruction that's going on, and you know, President Trump's been very explicit at times about saying he wants to deconstruct some of the government processes and say, well, in fact, that's actually a good thing in the long term because it's opening these systems up for radical change. Yeah. And radical change is needed.
Yeah, and the characteristic, though, to come back to the beginning of this conversation, the characteristic of this is that these changes are coming in shorter and shorter periods of time.
Yeah.
And if you look at past paradigm shifts, what you find out is that you get, 8 or 9 or 10 times the kind of change there, the content, the complexity, the information kind of density in the new era than you had in the last one. And so what you're doing is you're compressing this transition and exploding it into a new space, and the new space is by definition going to be impossible to kind of make sense from down here where we are at the present time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's an emergent process, yeah.
And it's going to end. This is a really quite exciting. If you can back away from all of the games that are going on the day to day, and of course the media don't. The media, all they want to do is what's the fight and what's the conflict that's going on for the moment, and you get no larger kind of perspective about all of this.
Yeah, exactly. I think what it is revealing too is a need for more global coordination.
Yeah.
So, we've reached the point now where we're undoubtedly a global species, and we have all sorts of systems that operate all the way around the planet. And yet we still haven't really got a solid global coordination system. And so something that needs to develop sometime perhaps in the next 20, 30 years maybe.
So this new internet, that is different than the present internet, that has this decentralization and encryption and the other kind of things, really is nothing less than the basic infrastructure for the evolution of the next stage of humanity.
Yes, that is exactly right. And I think what we're seeing with technology like blockchain is our new economic system. This is it. This is it in its early stages, and the rush of support, even though it's still very early days with blockchain technology, There's significant support already for the cryptocurrencies and other things that are being done on the blockchain, and I think that's only going to grow.
Well, let's come back in our second segment here and we'll talk a little bit more about that and the literal kind of tokens and coins and the new things that are coming in, what other things you can do on this new internet and what's going on, and that'll be an interesting conversation. So it's nice to have you with us today, and thank you for coming and being with us on Postscript. Our guest today has been Steve McDonald from Australia, who is with us here today in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, for our Berkeley Springs Transition Talks. And this is a regular series that we do every month or so, and you can find out more about that at transitiontalks.org. And you can also, if you're interested in these kinds of subjects, you can link up with us at the Arlington Institute, where we think more broadly about some of these issues, and that's at arlingtoninstitute.org. So thanks for being with us, and come back, and in the second segment we'll talk more about blockchain and the new internet and what the implications of that might be to this emergent new world. I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and it's nice to have you with us. Thank you.